Hey gang, welcome back. So everyone knows about the hop-on, hop-off trolleys here in Savannah, and of course the horse and buggies, but I was looking to do a little something different. So I reached out to Daniel Richardson at Savannah Vintage Tours.
Same wheelbase as a Volkswagen Beetle, but you will notice the back seat back there is quite a bit bigger than what you would find in the back of a Volkswagen Beetle, right?
Well, what we're going to do is we are going to actually start down here on the river here in a second. I'm assuming you haven't seen anything so far, right?
No, we have not. We got in late last night.
Okay. And this is it. Okay. So what we're going to do is we do what I call an orientational tour. So it's really kind of a way to get your bearings as far as what's going on in the city of Savannah, where everything is at, and kind of give you an idea of where you want to go, what you want to do, what you want to see, and hopefully show you enough that by the end of it you realize that there is more here than you'll have time to see, and then get you to come back on another occasion, right?
Sure.
And maybe not take another tour, but just come back to Savannah. A lot of people come down here, they think, oh, this is a fun little town for a day or two, and then they find out that they'd rather spend a week or the rest of their lives sometimes down here. It's a pretty cool little place. So we're going to drive around. We don't typically stop unless somebody has used the bathroom or something, but we can if you want to stop, but generally we keep moving. There's a lot to see. But there are a couple of things that make this tour different and unique compared to the other tours here in town. If you were doing all your research, now of course I know you were attracted to this because of the car, but you saw, I'm sure, that there is every kind of tour that can exist in this town. There are trolleys, buses, vans, golf carts, segways, walking tours. If you can name it, there's somebody doing it here, right? Even this, but I'm the only one doing this, okay? Now what's special about that though is not the fact that we're driving around in a funny little French car, although that will mean that we get a lot of attention. But what's really important about the tours that I give is that they're private, because almost all the other tours here in town are communal affairs. You know, you sit there with a bunch of other people, which can be fun if you could make friends, but the problem is everybody's listening to the front of the bus where the guy or the girl in the driver's seat is narrating. And the problem with those is that you've got 30 people in a bus, most of them coming from Ohio and Florida and New York and all over, you know, and you got the guy in the front who has got to keep them all happy, and so he's got to keep to a script, and they got to recite that stuff. You know, they can do it in their sleep, they do it all day. Me, it's a little bit different, and I know as much, or honestly I think more than most of the tour guides, but the difference being is that on our tour, because it is just the three of us, we can have a conversation, it's conversational, but also once I get going and yakking and yakking and yakking at you, you can also stop me, and you can interrupt me, and you can ask me questions, either of you, about literally anything to do with the city itself, which is something you can't do on the other tours, right?
Awesome.
And you can interrupt me without hurting my feelings or anybody else's. But the problem is that I talk for a living, so you will have to interrupt. Okay, so you gotta hold on to that. Okay, remember that. You gotta interrupt if you got a question, and I really like it if you do because I get tired of talking to myself. So please, get involved. Okay.
Sounds good.
Now the other thing though is going to be that because we are in a weird looking little French car, we are going to be getting stared at and looked at and having our picture taken for the next little while. And while we're doing this, the two of y'all back there are the celebrities being chauffeured around town. So I recommend the Queen Elizabeth wave. It's easier on your wrist, and you just get to wave at people. Okay. And I'm usually focused on this part, the driving, not running into the pedestrians and police cars and stuff. So y'all get to do the waving, which people tend to like. Anyway, so you're going to get attention whether you like it or not, so it's better if you like it. But that's part of it. But anyway, so here's where we're actually going to start things. This is going to be down on River Street. And River Street is kind of the most iconic part of Savannah for tourists coming here. And has been for a very long time, and has changed very little in that time. It's still mostly t-shirts and keychains and souvenir tchotchke shops and stuff like that. But where we are specifically down here, on the furthest western end of River Street, is somewhere that's kind of new. And you said, Brandon, you were here once, but it was a long time ago, is that right?
Yeah, long time ago.
So long it doesn't matter, is that what I'm
Yeah, okay. So long I wouldn't remember any of it.
Okay, well just asking. So the story is that a lot of folks come here every few years, and the reason I start down here is because this area is all kind of brand new in the grand scheme of things. About 5 years it's been here. But down here on this end of the river, we have expanded and kind of revitalized an area that used to be a very kind of derelict industrial area. And where you guys are staying, you don't really have a direct view of down here because you're kind of in a residential neighborhood, which I think is good, but you can't really see down here. And you guys took the train at night, so you haven't really seen the horizon at all. But down here on the river, there are two big landmarks that stick up into the sky and kind of dominate the horizon. And the main one is the giant bridge. Have y'all at least seen pictures of that giant bridge back there? Okay, so we're going to see it a little bit when we get to the top of the hill, but this is a one-way, so we're moving away from it. The other thing on the river that's a landmark are these two giant smokestacks that point up out of what once upon a time was a coal-fired power plant, and then for a much longer time was an abandoned building down here on the river. And we just kind of redid all of this in the last few years and revitalized that old abandoned building and kept the smokestacks. They light them up at night now. They're kind of a landmark. And they returned it into a really cool little area down here with all kinds of shopping and retail and bars and restaurants. And we are right in the middle of it right now. And it doesn't look like much from where we're sitting. But over on the other side of this big building here, there is this beautiful waterfront plaza with a big waterfront music venue, all kinds of fun stuff going on down here, and it's all based around that old power plant, the one with smokestacks. This is what we call Plant Riverside District, originally called Plant Riverside for the power plant. But when you go inside of the building there, the JW Marriott Hotel has done some pretty incredible stuff with the building. When you go inside the big room where they used to have all the generators and stuff, you walk inside of there and they have suspended a giant life-size Brontosaurus skeleton from the roof, or the ceiling rather, of the building. And they filled that giant hall where all the generators were with all these really cool art installations, artifacts, geodes. They got a woolly mammoth skull in there. It's kind of a spectacle, and it's a lot of fun. So if you want to come down here to the river, where you want to start is down here on Plant Riverside, because once we get moving towards the end, it is going to all start looking exactly like what is over here on the right, which means it's going to be buy one, get one free t-shirts and mediocre seafood. And that's going to be pretty much the whole thing, you know, which is fun and iconic and neat and everything else. But it's a little bit like going to Disneyland. You kind of know what you're in for, right? And that's what this is. So you want to come down here, you want to get some photos, it's iconic, you get some cool pictures of the Georgia Queen and the river, but you can kind of see what it basically is now. That unlike the rest of the city, which was built for various residential or commercial enterprises, this down here was all built exclusively for the business of the port of Savannah. We're getting a picture taken over there too by that guy. So down here, these buildings were built to be warehouses, very simple industrial buildings for the business of the port. And the reason they put a power plant, which is now where they've got the dinosaur back there, down here on the river, is this was the most industrial, kind of the ugliest part of the city. And we have redone it all to make it really cute and get you guys to come down here as tourists. But this is all more recent in our history, in the later half of the last century. And River Street today looks nothing like it would have historically, aside from some of the buildings, which were originally, again, something very different than what they are right now. Now, when we go up the hill, though, we're going to be going up these cobblestones, the authentic cobblestones, and you can tell that they're authentic because they look a lot different than the ones down there on the street. These are all different shapes and sizes, kind of lumpy, multicolored things, and these are all actually old ballast stones that came over on the bottoms of ships back in the sailing and wooden ship days. And that's what these are all used to build down here. These were ballast discarded on their way here from Europe before going back to Europe with cargo holds full of cargo coming from North America. So everything down here is one way or another based on and around the port. But when you get to the top of the hill, and the hill is very important, again, geography here is kind of odd, we up here see that we have a very different view of architecture than what's on the river down below. And that's because when these buildings were built and
and they're not all from the same year, of course, they're from different periods. But when the buildings were built, the side facing the water was the back of the building, and the side facing inward, away from the water, was the front of the building. And you can see that this side, they put a lot more effort and energy into decorating the outside of the building with these big archways and the windows and the terracotta and the brickwork and the ironwork, all the beautiful stuff. This is where the city begins, in a sense, historically, not on the river where the port was, but up here on the top of the cliff, the old bluff upon which the city was built. And you can see it reflected in the architecture. And then what you'll also notice is obviously the buildings are shorter on this side because we went up a couple of stories, but also these catwalks that go across from the side of the old cliff, which is natural, not man-made, to the upper floors of the buildings. These are called factors walk, because factor was the old term for brokers and traders and business people. And so the idea was that you could walk across these walks, these crosswalks, to get to your offices from the city without having to go through the business of the port down below, where everyone was all big, sweaty, ugly guys loading and unloading boats. Nobody wanted to be down there. They wanted to be up here, and that's why you have this factors walk. It was a very functional thing.
You can book your tour today at SavannahVintageTours.com or call Daniel Richardson at the number on your screen.
But as we come around over here on the right, you'll see the actual, what we typically mean when we say city market, this pedestrian-only zone here on St. Julian Street over to the right. So if you want to come down here and see all this, you got to come back on foot. Big truck's not in the way ruining your view, and you can kind of see what's going on here. And this will get busier and busier and busier as the day goes on, although not as busy as it was last night on Saturday. Today is Sunday. But so the most important part of this little area, though, is actually a part that some people miss. And it's this big building directly in front of us. It's the one here on the right, First African Baptist Church. You can see they had services this morning. They got the van right there beside us. When you look up at it, though, it is worth noting there are a couple of things on the front of the building that are hints as to how important this building is. First, there's an inscription that tells you that the building was completed in 1859. 1859 being before the American Civil War. Now, you will notice that is the first African Baptist church. That's why this is important. African Baptist, originally called the First Colored Baptist. That building was built before the abolition of slavery, when it was still legal, not just in the South, but in most of the United States. That building was constructed from the ground up with the intention to be a stop on the Underground Railroad, where it was briefly during the American Civil War. That was built all throughout the 1850s by a community of both free people of color as well as enslaved people, not for anyone else's use but their own, okay? But the real significance there goes deeper and further into history than that. Above the inscription, there was a very small stained glass window of the original founder. There's a bust of him in the window, African-American gentleman, looking very dignified. He's the original founder of that church, a man named George Leal. And he founded the church not in 1859. He was originally ordained in the 1770s, before the American Revolution. And that church is widely regarded as the oldest African-American church in all of North America, literally older than the United States itself. They call that the oldest black church in America, and they mean it when they say it. It is recognized as that, the first African Baptist back there on Franklin Square. The story is that they do history tours there at the church, but it also is still an active church. But they do history tours because there is a lot of history there. And again, it was built by that community from day one. I mean, they literally built that into the design of it to be that, which is kind of remarkable when you think of the kind of the audacity of that, but to pull it off as well. It's a really incredible story of the First African Baptist.
Yeah, it's absolutely gorgeous.
So you did some research on that then. You saw the videos.
He does tons of research.
Yeah, I definitely want to go see that place.
Most of the tours, they just kind of drive on by it. It's from the street. It's not terribly impressive, you know, because the community that built it didn't have the funds that the Catholic Church did when they built the cathedral, obviously. But it's more the symbolism, the story of it. that's really impressive. I would argue the most important historic building in the city of Savannah, which is why I go out of my way to talk about it, even though some of the other tours just kind of scoot on by. Now, the reason we're circling this square, the big square, the biggest square actually, Johnson Square, is because in the middle of it, there's an important monument, one of the biggest monuments in the city of Savannah, that big obelisk there. It has on the side, we're about to be facing, a sculpture on the side of it, of the figure, who it is monument to, obviously, and named Nathaniel Greene, General Nathaniel Greene, one of the most important figures in the American Revolutionary War. That monument is to them, but it is also where he is buried inside. Nathaniel Greene, originally from Rhode Island, one of the top generals in the Revolution, directly friends with George Washington even, commanding general in the Southern Theater of the War, not here specifically. He did not serve here during the Revolution. He didn't do anything here during the Revolution, really, but he retired here after the war, died shortly thereafter, but he was originally buried over in Colonial Park, the cemetery, we'll go around in a little bit, before he was disinterred over 100 years after his death and removed into the monument back there in Johnson Square. He is one of 2 Revolutionary War heroes buried inside of their monument. We'll get to the other one at the very end of the tour, but that's Nathaniel Greene back there. We're about to go around Reynolds Square, which is mostly famous for where you guys are having dinner tonight, I think you said, the old Pink House.
Yes.
Okay, we'll see that in a second. Reynolds Square also, though, has a monument in it. Over here on the left, you can see there's a tall fellow there standing on top of the pedestal. He looks very somber. He's looking down. There's a man named John Wesley. John Wesley is known as the father of Methodism, of the Methodist Church, the Methodist movement. Now, the reason we have a monument in the middle of Reynolds Square to John Wesley is that John Wesley, before he was known as one of the first evangelicals and the founder of the Methodist Church, he was a simple minister in the Anglican Church, and he was friends with our founder, James Edward Oglethorpe, and he lived on this square. And he taught, preached rather, on this square, which is why there's a monument to him. He was briefly here in the 1730s and lived here in Savannah before going on later in life to do incredible things back in the and that's John Wesley. Over here on the right, this is the old Pink House, most famous restaurant in the city of Savannah. How long ago did you book those reservations? Out of curiosity.
2 weeks, 3 weeks maybe.
Oh, okay. That's not too bad. In the season, you got to book them months in advance. But we're not quite in the season yet. If the weather was like this every February, this would be the season.
Right, yeah.
It's not always like you're very fortunate and lucky. We had some real cold weather recently, and that always brings warm weather after. You know?
Yeah, it's about the same for us at home, just more humidity.
Yeah. Now over here on the right, we are pulling up to the first museum that I'm going to point out on the tour. And we are actually going to go by a bunch of museums, but I'm not necessarily going to point out all of them because some of them are better than others. They're all created equal. They're all owned and operated by different entities, groups, whatnot. But over here on the right, this is a very important one. This is the Owens Thomas House and Slave Quarters. This is one of our 3 Telfair museums. The Telfair Museum system dates back to the 1880s when they opened one of the first public art museums in the United States, the oldest in the South. We're going to go by that in a little bit if they haven't still got it blocked off the book festival. But over here on the right, the Owens Thomas House is a history museum, and it is a very significant one. Once upon a time, this was one of the most luxurious houses in America, but in the back of it, we also have some of the best preserved urban slave quarters in America, and they are part of the museum experience. And if you go into this museum, they have a docent who will guide you through and tell you about the rich folks who lived in the front of the building and the architect who designed the building. But they will also tell you about the people who lived in the building who had no choice in the matter, and they will explain what that meant. This is the Owens Thomas House and Slave Quarters. This is my favorite, I think the best history museum we have in town, but also because they are a member of the Telfairs. If you go to any of those 3 museums, you can get 1 ticket that is then good for the other two. So these are the museums that I recommend. We have a lot of other museums. I will point out a couple of others as we go by them, but you could easily spend a lot more time than you have here just trying to see all the museums and still not have enough time. So you kind of pick and choose which one. Now this week has been the book festival, so they had all day yesterday and the day before the square with the original Telfair blocked off for the speaking events for the book festival. That's a pretty big deal for us, the book festival. But we'll try and go by it if we can. I don't know if we'll be able to. But as I said earlier, the goal by the end of the trip is to have it where you have already started planning your next trip.
Right.
So if you don't have time to go do the museums this time, you can come back again. Right. Over here on the right, this is the temple Mickve Israel. This is the synagogue. This is the other very important historic church in Savannah, not the cathedral. This is the temple Mickve Israel. This building, built in the 1870s, is not significant for the building itself, although it is the only Gothically styled synagogue in America. This congregation goes back to 1733, July 1733, the very first year of the colony. We are home to one of the oldest Jewish communities in all of North America, going back almost 300 years. This is officially the third oldest synagogue in America, although you can make an argument it's the second oldest. And it goes back to the early colonial period here, when we were one of the only places in all of North America where Jewish people were free to settle. And this building is home to a museum as well as the synagogue, and they are also home to the oldest Torah in America. This is the oldest Reformed temple in America as well. The Jewish community here is large and prominent and a big part of our history, much like the African American community, going back to the very beginning, at least for the Jewish community, not for the African American community. Again, the third oldest synagogue in the United States. Temple Mickve Israel. Also over in the square there is a monument to a fellow from the Revolution. That is Kazimierz Pulaski. Kazimierz Pulaski, a great hero from Poland, originally served with the colonial forces in the Revolution, founded cavalry under George Washington, buried in his monument like Nathaniel Greene, but Kazimierz Pulaski was killed in action. He was killed during the Battle of Savannah, no less, in 1779 during the Revolutionary War. He was hit by grape shot, he was killed, he was buried hastily, and then reburied after the war under the monument, inside the monument rather, over there in the middle of Monterey Square. Monterey Square, named for the Battle of Monterey in the Mexican-American War. Over here on the right, though, we will find the building that is famous because of that book and that film we were talking about, Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil. This is what is known in the book and the film as the Mercer House, but is also known traditionally now as the Mercer Williams House. The Williams part of the name being Jim Williams, featured in the book. Also over here on the right is the Noble Hardee House. This one recently sold for a little over $4 million. Famous for all the ironwork around it. That's all iron around the windows, rusted brown. And then coming up on the very next block will be the Armstrong House, which is a house that was actually saved, like many houses in Savannah, including the old Pink House, by Jim Williams from Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil fame, although it came out after he died. This is the Armstrong House, which was a lawyer's office during his time. So this is now the largest private residence in the city of Savannah, over here on the right. It's the Armstrong Kessler Mansion. Over here in front of us too, this is going to be the fountain in Forsyth Park, the big white fountain there, which I'm sure you've seen pictures of. This is as close as we will get because it is in the park, obviously. That is the Forsyth Park fountain. Though Forsyth Park is our central park, it's the heart of the city, it's the center of the city, geographically, culturally, etc. This is very much Savannah's gem of a park, even though we have a lot of parks. We have a lot of parks, squares, all sorts of green spaces, roundabouts, whatnot here in the city. But Forsyth is the standout in a big way. Forsyth Park here on our left. When you live in the city of Savannah, you say the park, that's the one you're talking about. Over there on the right too is the Telfair Hospital, named after the same Telfair who founded the museum. She also founded the hospital, Telfair Hospital there, named for Mary Telfair, originally opened as a women's hospital, one of the first in the country, back in the 1880s. That was intended to be a hospital for women's health and studies. Became the maternity ward for the city up through the 1960s. But over here on the left, you can see Forsyth Park on a pretty day like today.
This is where everybody in Savannah is at, not just the tourists, people who live here too. This is the park, the Central Park, the center of the city. Also there on the left, you'll see the big bandstand, the white building. That's where you have a lot of outdoor events and shows and concerts, all kinds of fun things going on in the park. That is one of the original Forsyth Park forts, we call them. Mock forts built before World War I, now repurposed. Over here on the right is a really iconic hotel too, the mansion on Forsyth Park. It used to be called, now it's Hotel Bardot. Really cool piece of architecture here on the right. And as we go through the intersection on the right, there will be several SCAD buildings, some really pretty buildings. But also, after them, there will be the oldest hospital in Savannah, the old Kessler Hospital. No longer a hospital, but it's going to come into view on the right in a second. You'll see what I mean. Really beautiful building. Now also owned by the college. This big white gray building coming up on the right. Opened a little over 200 years ago. It's the Kessler Hospital. The big hospital for most parts. Also behind it, you'll find the oldest, largest live oak tree in the historic district, the Kessler Oak, right there behind it. That is on the National Historic Register of Places. You can't get too close to it, there's a fence around it. That is a protected tree. That's the Kessler Oak. And that's Forsyth Park. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go around one more square that is new to you, and that's Taylor Square. It's very interesting history. And then we are going to start wrapping up after that. So we're not quite done yet, but when we are done, I will need to know where you would like to be dropped off today.
The back at the hotel's fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
I just like to ask because we can drop you off anywhere you like. I just like to offer where. Named after a man named John C. Calhoun from South Carolina, United States Senator, Vice President of the United States under Andrew Jackson. Also known as one of the worst white supremacists this country's ever seen, one of the staunchest supporters of slavery this country has ever seen, and one of the men whose actions led very directly to the American Civil War. We named a square after him at the time because he was a prominent politician from this area, and slavery was very much in vogue in the southern states, although it was different here in Savannah than most places. We renamed the square, though, recently because of all those reasons I just said. We named it after a woman named Susie King Taylor. Susie King Taylor is the only woman or person of color who has a square named after them. We have 24 squares, by the way. There are plenty to go around. Susie King Taylor was born into slavery in Liberty County, ironically south of here. She was raised in slavery. When she was a girl, she came to Savannah to live with relatives. She went to school in a secret school for African-American children. Several operated here at the time. She learned to read and write. During the war, she escaped slavery and served as a nurse with the United States Army. She wrote a memoir after the war of her time with the Army during the war, during the battles on the Sea Islands here. Became a very prominent, famous memoir. After that, she also founded, or well, before that, she founded the first school for black children in Georgia, and spent a lot of her later life fighting for pensions and pay for African Americans who served unofficially with the United States Army during the Civil War. And so we renamed that square after her. It's now called Taylor Square. Everyone in Savannah celebrated when that square was named, except for one guy who repeatedly tried to sue the city of Savannah and put the old name back on it. Thankfully, he eventually failed. He also ran for various public offices, never succeeded at that either. There's always some guy, you know.
Yeah, there's got to be one.
There's got to be one, and I'm sure he wishes it was named after him, you know. But anyway, but that's Taylor Square, the only square we have renamed in recent years, and probably the only one we will rename. The only one who had a truly controversial person was named after. But anyway, that is basically the end of my script.
Well, we had an absolutely amazing time on our hour-and-a-half tour with Daniel. He was super knowledgeable and made the tour a ton of fun. Reach out and book a tour with him today. Your other half will be happy you did.